if you have something brilliantly implemented but not adopted, just a bloody waste of money. So what makes you a success is not the day you go live and it's in place. What makes you a success is if 1 year later people are using it effectively. And this is the part you drive with change management.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a new episode of the BPM 360 podcast. My name's Caspar, your host, and with me is, in all times, good or bad, Russell, my co-host. Russell, how are you, my friend?
I'm fine, and it's definitely good times. So
yes,
you say good and bad times, and not globally speaking, but let's say on a personal, local level. I would say everything's good. Currently in Cologne, having some really fantastic partner talks, and really drafting the vision of where consulting companies need to head at, looking forward in these dynamic day and ages. So that's I'll say a high level. That's like the level of collaboration we're talking with partners, and it's very interesting because the dynamics on the market are tremendous. Yeah, so around consulting, and you could say the topics are the same, but everything is getting a special twist. Yeah, and I think the impacts are far more reaching in every industry, also the consulting industry. And that's why I think it's exciting, great times to look forward to.
But you're basically answering the questions: how do we make sure that we don't get extinct because of AI?
Yes, and everybody is asking this question on a personal level, on a corporate level. So we all
of course.
I don't know how many comic panels I've seen now where everybody's talking about becoming extinct. And if you think back about the times where we were still looking at Terminator and Arnold Schwarzenegger and laughing about the ideas of artificial intelligence and robots taking over the world. It's astonishingly scary to a certain extent how not so far away, far-fetched that seems nowadays.
Yeah. We're heading towards Skynet. But I mean, and that would be a major change. And
absolutely,
yeah. Oh yes, and for that we have a guest, Russell. We have a guest once again, and I would really like to introduce our guest for today. And our guest and I go way back, but without further ado, Thierry Muller, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be together with you.
Yeah. Let's make it a one to remember. We're going to ask you to introduce yourself in like a second or so, but just for the listeners, Thierry and I worked together in a company called DSM. It was still called DSM at that time. It's now called DSM Firmenich. And we did some pretty amazing things together under his supervision, I would say, because he was the lead on that, and it had a lot to do with change management. So I want to just make sure that we make the bridge back to our mini-series episode on the change management leader. And today we're going to put some meat to the bones with Thierry. So Thierry, could you give our listeners a little bit of a rundown of who you are, how did you get where you are, and what was what sparked your interest in the change management topic?
And so I need to go back quite far away. So it's kind of 30.
We got time.
34 years ago. But let's start it. So my background is IT. So I'm an IT engineer. That's what I learned. That's with that background I went to the market, and I wanted day one to be a project manager. That was my goal. And the first project, I was a project manager, the analyst, the programmer, everybody, and I had no people working for me. But that was a start, That's called a junior project manager.
Yes.
But that brought me, very quickly into a bigger project, because at that time in the 90s, multinational, and at that time I was part of OFF, looked at replacing their mainframe from. There we go.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. So all the multinationals were looking at replacing the mainframe with ERPs. At that time, we didn't know who would be the winner. In the meantime, we know who the winner is. So SAP was the name of the game for many, many years. and that was the start of my career. So I was basically implementing SAP and SAP and SAP everywhere. First as an analyst, then as a project leader, then as a program manager, and so on and so forth. And now comes the point where I have the biggest project ever in front of me, which was to re-implement SAP after the merger of Roche Vitamin and DSM to have one single ERP for the entire company.
Oh, bloody hell. Yeah. B45. Yeah.
And I raised my hand because until then I was always successful, and I was sure that I would be successful too. Yeah, reality sometimes kicks in and it's different, and it was a basic flat failure. And I thought DSM would basically throw me out because I had to work on some feeds, but they didn't. And that was the start of the next leg of my career, because they said, obviously, we need to relocate you because some people really dislike you with, the opinion you were having and going against them. So they said, what about, coming to the headquarters in the Netherlands for a while? And by the way, we have a nice project started by the CEO. He wants to change the culture of the company. And every department needs to, do their stuff. And said, anyway, I have nothing else to do. And so let's go for that. And that was for me the start of understanding what change management was. Because if you change, or if you try to change the culture of the company, that's called change management. So that's where I start learning. And that's also where I start telling to myself, oh, that's basically what I like doing. That's basically what I was doing, but without knowing that I was doing it. So basically understanding the whole psychology behind change and behind what makes project work, I had the opportunity to learn and to practice and to apply in changing the culture of the IT department. And that was an immense opportunity for me and an enrichment you cannot imagine. And at that point, I became a different type of project manager, understanding the stuff I was kind of doing without knowing I was doing it. Because you have to realize that I was a change manager since the beginning without knowing it. Because if you do project, you do change management.
Yeah.
You cannot dissociate. And I know people tend to dissociate, but you cannot dissociate.
Yeah, that's interesting. There are two parts there. So what I think is really interesting is, say, so somebody says, I want to change the culture of the company. And if somebody gives you, let's say, this directive with that intention, then I think that's already a good starting point for change management, because then there is an understanding that you're looking at culture. And it's not like a lot of IT projects where they say, they need to learn how to use the system. They don't want to. We need to change them. We need to change their behavior. We need to make them compliant with what we want them to do. I mean, it's exaggerating now the negativity on the formulation, but a lot of the intent around change management, I think, is set wrong. And that makes it hard for a change manager to sustain, and also to argue for the time it takes and the budget it takes and the way it needs to take. So that's one thing. Maybe we could dig into that later as well. So because you said that he came to you and approached you, said, I want to change the culture. I said, oh, good. You just don't want to change the people and make them do what you want them to do in future and be more performant. But that's a complete different angle. I think that's essential when you're talking about change management. The other thing that I think is interesting as well, you said, as a project manager, you were doing that intuitively, doing that anyway, but not every project manager can do it, or he's not aware of it. And that's why he may not do it at all, or he does it wrong. And there could be the question raising there to say, so the project manager does the change management. Why do I need a change management lead? I don't need him. The project manager, that's his job. Just do it, which happens a lot as well, which is then sometimes from a workload, from a skill perspective, is too much for the project management to cope with and to do, especially on a big project. So there's 2 points that you just mentioned in your introduction there, where it said very interesting topics to dig into.
absolutely. We can come back, but let me finish.
Yes,
So
please.
I was then during 4 years in corporate HR. IT guy in corporate HR, driving basically culture
Everybody
change
crazy.
version 2 for the entire company. Again, very, very enriching. That's where you learn that HR people do everything with words, including the table. Yeah. It's interesting. The tooling tells something about the people, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
true.
So the finance people, they would write their memo with Excel most probably. I'm exaggerating, but
Yeah,
that's kind of the type of difference you find in the different departments in the same company, by the way. And after these 4 years, I had these two things. So IT, digital, and the change in the HR part. And then I used that for the second, let's say, second part of the career. And that's where Caspar and I met.
yeah,
Restructuring, so big impact type of project. That's what we were doing together. But I was also in driving digital when it was kind of a hype in many companies. How do we bring something else than SAP to the people and things like that? And for 2 years now, I decided to quit the big multinational stuff and do only things I like doing. So I'm teaching at the university, and guess what I'm teaching? So project management, change management, comms, because you cannot be a good change manager if you're not good in comms. Sorry to
yeah,
say it. Yeah, but it's not everything, but it is one of the big means you have to bring people on a certain way, to make them reflect. You have to choose the right words. You have to have this feeling on using words and to basically not convince people, but make them aware, propose them
yeah,
choices. And you can do it very good, but you can also do it very poorly. I've seen that too.
yeah. I can totally imagine that. Sorry, Russell, I was muting you for a second because of some background noise.
Okay.
But so very interesting career so far, Thierry, and certainly the point that Russell mentioned earlier. If we need to come back to that. Is what is the difference between the project manager and a dedicated change manager? But before we get into that, I'd like one thing to just check real close. I mean, you implemented SAP a zillion times and more often than you probably care for. That means that you also came very in close contact with the concept of business processes, because that's how SAP typically gets implemented. And
Correct.
in your experience, when a company tries to implement an ERP system, it's not limited to SAP, of course. But what is your experience in applying change management to make sure that people actually follow the processes that are laid out because of the ERP implementation?
My experience, I've seen two ways of going. One, telling the people what the process are, and that's already not a good first step. Yeah,
Yeah,
because people dislike what they did not invent. We are just like that. So the other thing is using the first phases for people to discover themselves what the process are going to be. So, for
yeah,
instance, one thing which was successful was obviously you have the Aziz, where they describe the current process, and then the to be, and instead of telling that's what it is, let them be active in that part too, to discover and to design the processes that's going to be the future. Uh, it takes a little bit more time, but at
yeah,
the end, they own the bloody to be. Otherwise, it's still not theirs, and they're still against it because they still believe that the old one was better. And I'm
yeah.
overdoing it a bit, but
No, but sure.
but usually when you get people in doing some process work and process thinking, and they understand obviously that the process will change and the tool has limitation, but let them do the work, let them draw the process. At that time, we were drawing process. And then they slowly become the owner of the future, and that makes a whole difference.
Yeah. So just really quickly, and then I'll let Russell pitch in as well. I obviously also was present at the time that DSM and Roche Vitamins, I would almost say when they merged. I think formally it was an acquisition, but in reality it was a merger. How did you experience, let's say, the cultural differences of a more Swiss-based company with a Dutch-based company? Because there was some cultural clashes for sure. But how did you deal with that at that point in time?
So I'm French, so I'm neither Swiss nor Dutch.
Yeah,
So
that helps.
no, and that really helped, to be honest. That really helped.
And we all know the French have a very special culture.
I'm coming from Alsace. That makes it even more special. So I'm a bit German from the roots. So we have a German dialect where I live. So that makes it even more complex. But there were first of all, I had a total different or wrong image of Dutch people. For me, they were from the north. The north, it's like the German, like the Danish, like the north. So structured and everything. And I quickly understood that was not really the case. These people are good in selling. Yeah, that's what the culture is about. So the first clash, that was interesting because at that time I was leading up to 200 people. Yeah. So basically the entire former Roche IT in Europe. So that was more or less the job I had. And there were constant confrontation and cultural issues. Give you an example is, the Swiss.
I
When
do.
the rule is a rule, and it's more than a rule, it's law. Yeah. So keep that in mind. And then the Dutch come because the Dutch know the Dutch. So for them, if they want the Dutch to achieve this, they place the bar here so that they're sure that they will land here. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
The problem with that strategy with Swiss is when you say Swiss, that's what you need to reach. They will do that. Yeah. So, and it was just impossible. Yeah. And it was not intended to do that. So I remember I had to calm down the people and say, this is just a guidance. The French are okay with this, finding a way out. So that's what I said. It was a bit of an advantage.
They always do.
Yeah. So, but that was a big clash that people were, looking at objectives and how to achieve in a pretty different way. And you had to really have people understanding. There is no truth. The Swiss are not right, neither the Dutch nor the French.
Yeah.
It's just a point of view. So you need people understanding this complexity and conveying it. And that, and then you can slowly bring people together because it's just a question of time. And after a couple of years, people get used to each other. They understand this is forming the new culture. But at the beginning, you need people able to make the bridge. You need people able to make the bridge.
And so, is there a? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Russell.
So this bridge that you're talking about, is that then the role of the change management lead or the change agent to have like these skills? And is it something that you're, let's say, born with? Is it something you can learn or train on to be able to actually act as this bridge between cultures when you're talking about diverse, teams that you need to bring together on a journey?
And this will link back to your first question, Russell. And I will first ask you a question to illustrate. Would you hire any finance guy not able to operate Excel?
Nowadays, he would have to operate AI.
Yeah. But let's say this type of thinking, formulas. So the question is no, you wouldn't. Yeah. I think we shouldn't promote any person to a leadership position of any kind if the person is not ready or has not acquired change management skill. That's the point. So the bridge can never be a change manager you hire, and even less if you hire him or her from outside. This is a skill you need to have internally. That doesn't mean that you cannot have an army of change manager doing the work you tell them to do. But at the top, you need to have a layer of people deeply understanding what change management is and what makes people move or not move or resist. And these people need to be internal. So, for instance, when I had this change in click in my head, understanding what change was, and it is an important part of the success of a project, I delegated to external people all the PMO stuff, all to the point that some people said, "Yeah, but he's bloody doing nothing. You know, all the hard work is done by the PMO guy." Well,
Hey,
I was focusing on the change, on the comms, because at the end, you know, if you have something brilliantly implemented but not adopted, it's just a bloody waste of money.
oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So what makes you a success is not the day you go live and it's in place. What makes you a success is if 1 year later people are using it effectively. And this is the part you drive with change management, not with PMO. I'm not saying you know, if your solution is crap, it's obviously not helping. Yeah. So I'm not saying yeah. So you need both. But at the end, you have to make a choice. You cannot do all the PMO stuff and on top add, you know, the communication, the understanding of the stakeholder, how to engage them on the message. So I deliberately made the choice to delegate the easy stuff because that's easier to delegate to an external than the rest. And yes, then
yeah.
sometimes you need external people if you don't have enough internal to help you execute. But at the top, you need to have the skill internally, and any leader should have that. Any leader, we should not promote any person to a leadership role without having this. And yes, some will be better than others. Yeah,
Of
let's take it.
course, yeah.
But a minimum, and I can tell you, the minimum is not there in many heads.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. Because the project management, especially, I mean, principally, you could say a project manager just has to manage the project. But what is that typically? And there is a lot of communication to stakeholders, to management, getting the strategic guidelines, fighting for budgets, and maybe or facilitating decisions that are critical also for the solution. So on that behalf, there is also a lot of communication and change that is also will, let's say, manifest itself in a crappy solution at the end if you do not manage that well. Because then maybe
Mhm.
technically you're doing, or the PMO is doing a fantastic work, but you're going directly in this, some direction that is not really intended from the management. And then change management is not so much the topic, but then more or less alignment from a requirements perspective and strategic guideline down to the team that need to adjust also their thinking in according to the management's objectives. So I think that project manager, the unicorn you're talking about, that has great change management skills and knows what to delegate. I'm still thinking about this because you said you need people to execute, but the role we were talking about, Caspar, was
mhm.
really taking a lot of these soft skills. And I think to be able to give context to change management, I'm completely with you. External will not help because it understanding the culture, understanding your management where they want to go to, and understanding your internal teams and how they work to be able to bridge the gap. For an external, I think that's very challenging. So even if somebody's well trained and he's very flexible and empathetic, he will still always he can facilitate a lot and mediate in certain like friction points. So I think they could do a great job in supporting the overarching like change management lead. But I'm with you to really get this real in-depth of understanding of context of your company culture and the company operating model and the management guidelines where they want to go. Can that be done by an external? And that's a good point. I think it's hardly possible. But I think also project managers are overwhelmed with this task, with all the other tasks that are put on their plate. And I think that is a
Yeah.
big challenge for all big transformations. how to set up a team that can accomplish this.
But just real quick. So if I go back to the first project when I entered DSM in 2001, the first project they put me on was a project called Apollo, and that name will ring a bell to Thierry. Probably not to you, Russell, but that was a major process harmonization and later on ERP implementation project where they started doing the right thing. They started by bringing people from the different business groups together and say, please define a standard procure to pay process, a standard order to cash process, and then they would set up an SAP system that would support those processes. They went a little bit overboard on the customization, but again, it was early 2000s. You didn't know any better right then. But that was a good start. And then what you saw in the implementation in the business groups, that was done as a PMO task primarily. And there were only one or two business groups that actually added some change management. And the reason why I know that is because I audited pretty much all of them as part of my job at that time. And some of them were really good at it because they had project managers that understood that change management aspect. And Thierry, you probably know Jos Kremers when I say his name.
Mm-hmm.
He understood that change management part. I'm not saying he was brilliant at the execution of the change management, but he was really good in understanding how to move and change people. And without that, it becomes a technicality, and technicalities tend to become shelfware, in my view, pretty quickly. So having said that, Thierry, imagine, because what a lot of our listeners might run into when they're doing a BPM project, so you're implementing process management, and so meaning process documentation, maybe an ERP system, maybe nowadays it's all done to make AI possible. A lot of these companies, the people that are in charge of those BPM projects have a hard time persuading or convincing top management that this is important. Do you have like a golden nugget? I'm not looking for a silver bullet. I'm just looking for a little bit of nuggets of wisdom. What can these people do? What type of change management? I don't want to call them tricks, but what kind of change management applications could you leverage to make them understand better?
If you look, the main issue we have in most of the company is the number of projects which are competing against each other.
Okay.
Yeah.
So misaligned project goals, you mean?
No, even the quantity of projects that are running in parallel. To basically, let's say the result you want is to create a movement, something that moves and moves alone in a certain direction. But this is difficult when you have so many projects going around and people being involved in 3, 4, 5 projects. This is an evolution which is worrying me, because I think we are just shooting beside what we want to do. We want to do more, but basically we do less by just multiplying stuff that we're not really doing. Yeah. Let's go back 34 years ago. There was no issue to get people full-time on your ERP project. Zero problem. Yeah. People, we had reserve or we could replace. Now, in any project I've seen, that the people are involved in 3, 4 other projects at the same time.
Yeah.
And imagine the number, the people being overwhelmed by all the initiatives that will basically change their job. So there is a multiplicity of things. So, and BPM is one of them.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And that's why you see every project, not only BPM, they have, because too many projects are competing. So obviously the silver bullet would be to reduce the number of projects and concentrate and do the right stuff. Yeah. If you're able to do that, you are going to win. Damn sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, if you're not, then sorry to say, but you will need to outsmart the others and be better than them. Yeah. So be better than them and in positioning your project versus theirs, and making your project, unless that's to be the case, feel look, smell more important than the rest.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. All right. It's a zero-sum game.
Yeah, because at the end, if you don't create this feeling, it's useful. It's even more useful for me to be part of this project or to spend more time on this project than on the other. The quality of the result, but also the adoption will be far superior. So sorry to say, but you have to compete against the others and win.
Yeah, well, that's interesting.
Yeah,
Is
sometimes
that
this internal competition is done on purpose to a certain extent, but it's not the right way to go about it. And this alignment on common objectives broken down to like a program of initiatives that are complementary, aiming at an overarching like company like strategy. I think if that is in place, I think a lot of project managers and change managers have an easier life because they know what they're paying into. So as soon as you do see people in the projects themselves being pulled between initiatives, it's such a strain. So ultimately, I would say to you, nobody could win this game. You may win locally for your project, get access to resources, anything else, but on the long run, somewhere it's going to backfire because the strain on the employees and the argumentation and the pulling around it, the non-alignment is. I think that's something as a bad example for culture in a company that you don't want to foster. And if you're talking to organizations about streamlining your processes and your systems, and you're not managing to set up a program of initiatives that are, let's say, tightly aligned and integrated and convey a message in one direction, and where they can sort out the priorities in a manner that it's not heavily impacted on the back of the employees and the project members, then that's already calling for disaster, isn't it? I'm saying this because I have so many situations where exactly this has always been a big issue of the project manager and the change management, and where, let's say, at the bottom line, the project members were just saying, "You must be kidding." It's like, you could say, "We need you to do this, but you need to understand." And the answer, they get to the level where they're saying, "You must be kidding. Are you serious?" And that's something where, coming back to culture, I think it's walking the talk of, how do we want to collaborate? Where do we want to achieve? And is this something that also the project culture is part of the company culture? It's not something you said, we're doing a project and we have to be really hard and tough, and then we go to company culture. I think one really important thing is what you live in the project culture is, to a certain extent, your company culture that you're living. And I think a lot of people think these are disjunct, but they're not. They're very tightly linked.
I thought about this quite a bit. I'm not going to implement it because I'm not going to re-enter the corporate world, but that's my theory. I think we could fix it very simply if we change the indicator of the project. A project would not be successful once implemented. So let's assume you have a SAP project or a BPM project, which is finished in a certain date. The project team goes on. They have a tap on the shoulder. Their incentive will be given to them, and so on and so on. Say, no. You will get the incentive or the promotion 1 year after the project. When we'll see whether you delivered the value that you had in your business case.
100%.
Yeah? If we do that,
100%.
if we do that, I can guarantee that we will diminish substantially the number of projects, because people will understand we're doing a hell of a lot of projects, but none is delivering the value. So let's do less and make sure that we deliver value.
Is that, and that's an interesting point, Thierry, because what we've been discussing the last 5 to 10 minutes is basically the art of getting ahead or get something done is determined by how good you are in stopping something. because we need to stop more in order to free up resources to get ahead on the things that really matter. Would that also be part of the explanation why, for instance, if you look to the US, where they have this fail fast concept, where they say, let's try this, doesn't work, let's stop it. In Europe, we tend to be more scientific about it and say, yeah, let's just give it another chance, or let's rewrite the project charter and let's restart or revamp the project. While it should have been stopped like 6 months earlier.
Yeah, maybe, but for me, it's more we don't want to wait until we see the value. We're not even willing to invest after the project to ensure the value is coming. That's more what I want to say.
Yeah,
For
true.
instance, if you look at project management, it starts a little bit before the real start of the project, and it ends just a little bit after the project is finished, and then everybody's gone. Incentive is distributed. Also, the sponsor. Let's take the common experience we had together. Restructuring. It's the easiest project in terms of getting the business case.
Yeah.
Because you say, okay,
sure.
I need to reduce 5%. It is 5%. You know how much costs you the personnel. So the business case will be reached, and everybody is going to be happy and so on. The problem is the organization you have at the end more efficient than before? That's the real value. Not that
true.
you saved the company 5 million, which is a little bit of the value, but the real value, the one which matters for the future, is were you able to create a new organization which is more powerful, more efficient than the previous one? Because if not, why the hell did you do the project?
Yeah.
So
true.
And that everybody's gone. The project is finished. We cashed in. It's on the plan, and finance is happy. Everybody's happy. But who is looking at, is the new organization happy? Are they able to do more with less people? And that starts during the project, but needs to go on after. And that's why we also had our famous indicators, the pulse, to say, okay, restructuring happened. How are the people? And if the curve goes down, you have a problem.
That's a good point, because the initiative you did the days, that was actually after let's say the mechanics of organization were adjusted, and then you knew, and the program was deliberately put as an integration path or change management initiative afterwards. Now, and transporting that through all these transformation projects we see, it means that you have to start change management before the project even starts, when you're onboarding, setting your objectives, and there's a lot of people that are already disrupted or need change or support and communication before the initiative has really had their kickoff. Where you start really moving. But the more important point that I take out of it is absolutely right, is that it's way after the final last milestone or the last sprint that actually the harvesting and the adoption and all these actual real things that impact in the outcome of what you've invested in actually then happen or don't happen. And that's where the company has to continue investing. So it's like, you can't just implement a system and then stop running it. You still need the servers, and you still need to maintain it, to enhance it. And the same is for the organization as well. And this is a lot of the time just, it's not, people know it's there, but they ignore it. They ignore it in the planning, in the resources that are required, the budget that is required, the time that it requires is neglected. And I think that is a one big part around change management, which is completely misunderstood. So the project manager is released, but as a change advocate or project advocate, he still needs to continue his activities.
Or somebody, it might be some different, but it is to be clear that once you're live, it only starts. The harvesting of value starts. And as good as you were as a project team, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know the shortcomings. You don't know the mistakes. You don't know the misunderstandings that are still in the organization. So you need an organization, whether this is the prolonged project organization or some people freed up from the customers organization, customer in terms of customer of the new tool or whatever, there needs to be some time reserved to make sure that we're harvesting the value. And
Yeah.
that's almost never done. I've seen this is the exception. This is
Yeah.
the exception.
So I mean, I support a lot of clients in this implementation phase. I'm not doing implementation. I'm not a project manager. I'm more of an advisor and maybe sometimes part on the change management side. But the main KPI that I look at when we implement a BPM solution for a customer is not the technical go live. It's the growth of the adoption afterwards. So
That's a good
am I going to
indicator.
get in conversations with the customer half a year later that says we would like to upscale the adoption of our answer? We would like to have more licenses. That typically is a good sign. At least you've done something that that in the adoption that people are using it. Because if you implement something that's not used, you might have well not implemented it in the first place. So that's an interesting part. I really like this conversation. Just a small topic, Thierry. I remember from the restructuring project that I worked in with you, is we used a number of different change management concepts that we used in our workshops. And by no means this was an afterthought, right? This was a quite an expensive project to run for a year after the mechanics have been done to make sure that the adoption was taking place. Which one or two, or maybe three, it's up to you, which one or two change management practices are the ones that you are using the most, but that you know are effective, just generically speaking? I mean, a little bit of a golden nugget for our listeners.
Let's make a little list. So the first one is ensure top leadership engagement.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like change management, but if the top is
I know it is.
If the top is not supporting, maybe you should do something different, or use your valuable time to do something different.
Yeah.
It's a key test at the beginning. Do they really want it? Because if they do not really want it, what are you going to do? Once you have that, is change management needs to be at that level. You know, I've listened to your previous podcast, and I heard Russell say at the end they become the people organizing the training. Yeah, that's what you don't want it to become. Yeah, because if that's it, then you're doing training, you're not doing change management, which is part of, it helps, but so you need to place it as high as you can. And you need to sell it, and it's a very easy way to sell it is the value. All these top leaders look at value. So if you are able to bring the message, look, the project is going to spend the money, change management is going to ensure that you have the value. That might spark some interesting conversation, and place it at the right level, because it's just about training people. Nobody at the top will be really interested.
And here I think this is something that there's two things I would take out of that as well. First of all, you said change management has to be something inside the company, which makes even more sense if you're thinking that you need to take it beyond the project end. So project end, the PMO, with the last milestone, you could say, pack up, let's go. So principally, you could even rename the change management role into something like you were saying, harvesting. So the sustainability in the sense of sustainable, implementing and adoption, like an adoption manager. So I'm just thinking of random names now to say there is more to it, and the value creation, the real. When have I done my job? Always has to be set at a time X after the actual technical implementation to see if you've implemented processes. And that's why I really love this topic as well, because I've always said about people implement systems and they never think about implementing processes. Very, very seldom they think about implementing processes, and the processes aren't implemented after you've done the training. Typically, they're not directly live. They go live with the system, but are the processes in flow? Is the team working as they should do? Are they harvesting actually? Are they achieving their KPIs that were foreseen? No. So there's getting the system, with system I mean IT system and humans working, interacting as a system, in the processes, until that is on a level that they are really highly performant. That's where you normally have excellence initiatives, and you have like rounds of retraining, refining the system, refining the rules, and understanding, how to work and collaborate better. All these aspects are so neglected because you jump into the next project. But, everybody's then gone and they're pulled off to new projects. So establishing this idea of change management actually being the process implementer, the adoption master, and the actual harvesting, person accountable and responsible for harvesting, that gives it a whole different twist on the value, and therefore something that you can also argue to invest in better than before. And that would be my take out of it in comparison to the traditional box change management is put into.
The second thing, to come back to your question, Caspar, would be linked to comms, but just not communicating to communicating. You communicate to make sure that people adopt, and the adoption path is for everybody the same. The first thing is make sure they are aware of that something is coming. Make sure that BPM is coming, that at least aware that the project is coming, and that doesn't mean that they like it nor that they understand it, but so because we move from being not aware to being aware, to understand, to start maybe thinking, oh, that might be useful for me. And back to the human, because if it's not useful for me, why the hell should I do that on top of the 99 other things I have to do?
Exactly.
So creating awareness, understanding, desire. Oh, this could be interesting. This is good for me, for my department, for my team, for my company, whatever. And at the end, going to the more easy bit, which is then at the end, they need to be trained, that they have the knowledge and the capacity to operate. But that at the very end, before, you have to create the awareness, the understanding, and the desire. And you use comms to do that, and you use indicators to tell you whether you achieve the awareness, whether you achieve the understanding, whether you achieve the desire. Because otherwise, you're just like blind. You communicate, but you have no clue whether people like it, understand it, desire it. But you've communicated, tick the box, and go to the training. That's going to be okay. No, it's not.
What would be a good indicator to measure how far you achieve desire? I mean, I was thinking about this. I mean, I love the unaware, aware, understand, desire thing really much, and I like the fact that we use communication for that, and words are really powerful. But how do we set up an indicator to measure the achievement around desire, other than asking people? And maybe that is the KPI, but I mean,
until now, I've mainly used this repetitive type of survey.
Exactly.
And the pulse we had was a kind of desire thing.
That was the same thing. True.
So asking on a regular basis, and that's why I'm against this yearly HR, a thing which tests, which then takes us just a snapshot, and then we speak about it for 3 months, and it's just a bloody snapshot. It's a photography of a day of a company. Okay. Depending on what happened in your department the week before, is going to influence tremendously the result.
Of course.
Doesn't really have a real big value. So measuring often is something. Then the other thing, which is perhaps linked to your question on the desire, is you need to understand what drives people, and what drives people is what they believe in. So that's the ultimate weapon. Because you have the thing, you have the mindset drives behaviors, and the right behavior drives the result. But there is something before, which is the belief.
Okay.
So belief is all. You react like you react. You do what you do because of the set of belief you are. you have in your mind, and the brain doesn't make any difference between the belief you have and the truth.
Okay.
So by changing the belief, you change the desire.
Right. Good. Russell, we have an entire new career ahead of us. So basically, I mean, there's this TV show, I think it's called Mindfuck, where you try to make people believe things that are not there. So I draw this parallel. Of course, Jerry, it's not as seriously that I mentioned this, but this is quite a revelation, because I don't think that any BPM project that I've ever been in actually goes all the way back to beliefs. They typically go to, we need to make people understand that they need to do it, but that's not generating commitment per se. That might be generating compliance, but compliance is something that's commitment without believing, I would say.
So what would be power? I'm just making a sentence now. If you are able to make people believe that BPM is the only thing a company should do to become more powerful, you have an avenue.
But
It says
no,
easy, but
it's really good.
I'm overdoing it.
No, because we can go down this rabbit hole, because I was discussing with some. So first of all, I believe, yes, that's the way. I do think that we start working on beliefs when we preach about process management. Yeah.
True. Yeah.
And ultimately, we do want everybody to take on the same belief that are not too dogmatic. We want to, we're not really hard on the 10 Commandments, but we want them to set down the 10 Commandments and more or less stick to them around this. And the thing is, if you have, and this is something around company culture and all these different projects, if you have different beliefs in your company, Lean Six Sigma versus BPM versus enterprise architecture versus whatever, then they all actually believe in the same thing, process excellence and this, but they have slightly different rules and philosophies behind it, and you have an issue. So you have to align these. So you have to have, I was talking to this process philosopher in the podcast, and I said, you need to have, what do you call it? When you have like two religions having like a mess together, what do you call it? It's called a,
there's a name for it, but
there's a name for it. So
we'll look up the name later.
I don't know what it is in English. So you actually have to get the Catholic and the Protestant priest to actually hold a mess together and say, you know what, the common values are there. We don't have to bicker about these differences. We have to talk about what we have in common. And even that is something that we see in companies a lot. So there's a lot about actually helping people change by actually setting a common culture and belief that what we are doing and the way we're changing, where we're going, is the right way to go. And the more people, let's say, sign into this direction, it is the more harmonious it will actually happen. And a lot of the times, there's no right or wrong. As you said that, Thierry. But if we all agree upon doing something in one common way, we're fine. We'll definitely work better than if we have different approaches to certain transformation.
That's interesting. Well, he will pop back in, and this is what happens during authentic podcast recording. Sometimes things go wrong, but we talked a lot about change management, so we will actually deal with that. Jerry, I'll wait until Russell gets back in, but we are about to wrap up the episode anyhow.
And maybe I can give you an example of this belief, which was powerful.
Yes, please. Yes, please go ahead.
Russell is coming back, and it's about continuous improvement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? Where to make it happen, you want employees working in the production to come up with their own ideas. And a very common belief is, I'm not stupid. I'm not going to make an improvement which is going to reduce, which is going to give me more work or reduce the number of people. Am I stupid? I'm not as stupid. So that's a strong belief which is happening and which is slowing down all the continuous improvement type of project, because any idea is going to be used against me. That's the belief.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a strong belief because it has an influence on me. If you're not able to change that belief it's good for me and the team to propose because he's going to do different thing and the outcome is going to be positive. If you're not able to change that belief, your continuous improvement program is not going to be a big success. Full stop.
And that's interesting because, I mean, isn't that also the reason, if you look at why continuous improvement was so successful in Japan, for instance, at Toyota, because the people had a guarantee that if they made improvements, they would rather be promoted than fired. Yeah. And that gives, of course, a certain psychological safety net to people where they will start, that belief is then changed into, I can make an improvement, and by making an improvement for the company, I make an improvement for myself as well. That they put the company first, typically.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very, very interesting. Okay. Wow. I have the feeling that Russell might not be able to be back, but we're gonna wrap it up anyway. Thierry, it has been a very big pleasure to have you on the show. I hope you enjoyed it as well.
A big pleasure to be with you and to talk. And I like this authenticity. It's not scripted. We just go and bounce ideas and come back to it.
That's exactly what we also get back from listeners, is that they like that. And so we keep doing that. And sometimes we have technical issues with Russell in this case, and we just keep going. So Thierry, thank you very much. To our listeners, I would say thank you for joining in and see you at the next episode. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.